Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Strange Pathways. I am your host, Scott Mort. Getting a bit of a late start on it this week. I had a very busy day. I sold a house. First time I've ever sold a house. I took part in the closing procedure. Two friends of mine restored a house. They brought me over to deal with some of the paperwork. Speak a little bit of Spanish. The people that bought it were from Venezuela, so a little Spanish was spoken. Not much, thankfully, because I know about enough Spanish to beg for money on the streets. But it was an interesting little thing. I have just been suffering through this heat. We are experiencing a heat wave in Pennsylvania. I bet wherever you're at, you're probably experiencing the same thing as well. Stay cool out there. Grab a nice, tall, cold glass of water with like the sweat just pouring down the side. Turn the lights down low. And let's talk creepiness. Our first tale is going to take us on a ferry just off Kodiak Island, Alaska, May of 2014. Now, our witness, Y, is on this ferry because of a softball trip. He was 18 at the time, and a lot of them had snuck up on the deck around 11:30 just to watch the waves, smoke cigarettes, a little bit of weed, just essentially being teenagers. Now, the sun was about to set, but it's still a little bit bright outside. And that's whenever they notice that pod of orcas swimming in the ferry's wake. Now, orca fins, they're about 4 to 6 feet high, and they look like these big black spikes coming out of the ocean. Orcas will travel and hunt in pods of somewhere between 15 and 40. They're apex predators. Y calls them the beautiful demon murderers of the sea. They see these pods of orcas. They count them. There's around 10, 15. Some babies are scattered in there. And it takes them almost a half an hour to all go by. They were trying to get pictures, but it was so dark the phone cameras weren't very good. Another half hour, maybe 40, 45 minutes goes by. They've all sobered up a little bit, and it's getting really dark. They're cold, they're sleepy, there's no more orcas, they haven't seen one in about 30 minutes. And that's whenever one of the other players spots another orca. They all turn and look. One dorsal fin, and then another dorsal fin, another and another, then two more in separate rows, and they're a lot taller. They're jagged. Some have whole chunks torn out of them. And these are not that 4-6 foot high. These are all 8 to 10 feet high. They surface a little bit more, and that's whenever they realize they are all attached to just one creature. They can barely see its back cutting through the water, covered in these rows of spikes, and it just keeps coming. And it's close. It's only 20, 30 feet away from the ferry, and it's running parallel to it. All of the softball players are transfixed. There's 9 or 10 of them. No one's saying a word. They're all stunned. It's horrific. It's terrifying. And it's obviously not a whale. Someone did try to take a picture, but it was too dark. The only reason they can see this thing is the light cast from the ferry portholes. They just keep watching it. It takes 6 or 7 minutes for this thing to surface. It was long. 60, 70 feet, maybe longer. And all covered in enormous spikes. No one says anything until after the last of it disappears. This is something that should not exist. And yet all of these softball players, they saw the same thing. This thing was trailing the orcas, probably hunting the orcas, apex predators. What do you even say? Every once in a while, one of the players will check in with everybody else and go, "Do you remember this? Was I hallucinating? Did we see the same thing?" And not during the trip, not after. No one says anything to any of their friends because you can't really tell somebody about this. We've discussed this before. This is not something that you tell people. They'll think you're insane. And that's a shame. That's a shame. Because this is just one of the stories that we're hearing. How many beautiful, wonderful, amazing, true stories are out there? And no one will ever know just because we're all told by society, didn't happen. It's not real. You're a liar. Or at best, you're a liar. At worst, you're insane. Those waters are no stranger to the mysterious. On April 15th, 1969, just off of Kodiak Island, a shrimping boat, this 65-foot shrimping boat called the Mylark, was working the Raspberry Straits. It had sonar. The sonar in question was the Simrad EH-2A. At the time, in 1969, this was considered state-of-the-art. And it was used by a lot of fishing vessels to navigate, locate schools of fish. Shep Peterson, the skipper of the Mylark, believes he passed over an enormous creature at a depth of about 330 feet. Now, depending on where you look, the size estimates vary. The most common ranges I found were between 150 to 180 feet. Some have listed it as 200 feet or more. There is supposedly an echogram printout of the Kodiak dinosaur, but author and researcher Max Hawthorne believes this to be fake. He says that he saw the original. Now, if you're on YouTube, look up right now. Look up right now, and you're going to see that purportedly fake image. And Max Hawthorne, as I said, believes this to be fake, but he claims to have seen the actual image. And if you look up right now, you will see a drawing of what he saw. The Kodiak dinosaur sonar printout, which to him, and to me honestly, screams giant squid. It looks like a squid with the mantle facing towards the right, the tentacles trailing off to the left. I suppose it could be some sort of plesiosaur creature or a manta ray of some sort. But to me, I am seeing a squid. But honestly, at this point, it's closer to a Rorschach test than anything else. And these giant squid, they are, or at least were, very territorial. Take, for example, the case of the Pearl. Now, the captain of this schooner, the Pearl, James Floyd, had left the Indian Ocean. He was bound for Rangoon with a crew of 6. She was due to return to the Mauritius with a cargo of rice. The Pearl had put into the port of Gao for some water. And on May 7th, it leaves Gao, sails along the south coast of Ceylon. At around 5 p.m. on that day, Captain Floyd sighted the Strathoan a few miles off. A little while later, a great mass rises out of the sea about a half a mile off their starboard side. And it just spreads out. Stationary. It looks like the back of a whale, but it was sloped less. It was a brownish color, but even a half mile away, it looked larger than their ship, the Pearl. It just seemed to be basking in the sun. They weren't sure what it was. Captain Floyd rushes down to his cabin, fetches his rifle, returns to the deck, and takes aim at the creature who has started to advance. There was a member of the crew, Bill Darling, who knew that this was a giant squid and also knew bullets are just going to cheese it off. It's just going to make it angry. Captain Floyd ignores Bill. Floyd shoots at the squid. The bullet strikes, and the squid sinks. But they can see this huge oblong mass moving just under the surface of the water. The wake must have been 100 feet long. The Pearl, boom, shakes, a thud, and monstrous arms like trees seize the vessel, and it keels over. The monster was aboard the ship, squeezed in between its two masts. Bill is screaming, "Slash for all your lives!" All the slashing didn't matter. This squid, holding on by the tentacles, then slides his body overboard and pulls the Pearl down with it. All the men are thrown into the water. One of the crew was squashed between the mass and one of the tentacles. These things are territorial. They will attack. This is one of the sea monsters that we have verified is real. And we've all seen those old maps of strange snake-like creatures writhing in the ocean, and the phrase, "Here there be monsters." But there's always the kraken. There's always the giant squid. And I'm sure we all know the image of the giant squid's arms curling up around the ship. They are territorial. What caused them to stop attacking ships? Or maybe they still do. Maybe they still do. We don't hear about so much. Maybe just the fact that there are larger, much larger ships on the ocean now than then. These were smallish ships back then. But wait a minute. Maybe there is a more recent attack. In 1978, the USS Stein, a Navy frigate, its radar system just stops working. This is necessary for them to identify threats. This is a much needed piece of equipment. So the Stein, it heads for land. It reaches a dry dock, and the engineers can examine the fault there. Upon inspection, the engineers found, well, something they probably weren't expecting. There's this rubber coating around the radar dome called no foul. It was shedding. There were large tears covering up about 1/10 of the surface. Some of these tears were around 4 feet long. And at the bottom of a lot of these scratches were teeth. Teeth that can be found in giant squids. The teeth that they pulled out means, just looking at the size of them, marine biologists found, by looking at the size of these teeth, this is astounding to me that they can figure this out, that this squid had to be somewhere in the range of 150 feet long. Half a football field. Half the length of the Statue of Liberty. And this was 1978. Now these teeth, I don't want you to think that this is like the beak that's in the center of the squid's carapace. No. On the giant squids, this is horrifying too. On these giant squids, each one of the suckers on the tentacle has hooks, has teeth. Nightmarish. The ocean is terrifying. You look at some of the stuff down there, and it's so alien, it's so bizarre, it's so nightmarish. It's interesting to me that these attacks don't seem as prevalent as they were hundreds of years ago. But maybe they are. Maybe these missing craft, maybe all these missing boats that we never find are drugged down, their crew and passengers screaming as they're pulled under the waves to some abysmal cave at the bottom of the ocean. Just a pretty little trinket for a giant squid to goof around with and play with. Our next tale comes from Reddit. It was submitted by a user, and I'm going to mess this name up, but this user named Rafna Runar tells a very interesting tale of the White House with the red stairs. Now, when Rafna was a young child, maybe around 3 or 5, their father moved around a lot. He was ex-military, and he's settling into his second marriage. And they move into this house in Pocatello, Idaho. Rafna is just so excited. It's a real house. Not an apartment, not a manufactured home, but a real, honest-to-God house. Old and sturdy. Its paint job is snow white, wooden paneling, and a scarlet red staircase leading up to a large black door. But something about those red stairs unnerves Rafna. But they're excited. They're going to be in a big house in a town that they like. He's going to have his own room. But after a few weeks, little things begin to happen. Whenever Rafna's father would stay up late into the night, he would get ready for bed. He would notice the basement light peeking up through the black wood floors. He'd go downstairs, turn off the light, go back up, look down. The light would still be shining through the floorboards. And he would go down, turn it off, several trips up and down. Then one day, it's no longer cute. It's no longer fun. Something happens that changes the feel of the house. It was around midday. Rafna is in their room with a friend from school, and they're playing with these little tiny animal toys that look very realistic. If you go into Michael's or Hobby Lobby, you know exactly the toys that Rafna is talking about. I think the company is called Schleich. They're very realistic looking. Somewhat expensive, too. Now, Rafna's father's new wife comes in to tell the boy, hey, your mother's outside. She's come to take you home. They say their goodbyes. The friend exits the house, and Rafna begins to clean up the toys that he keeps in his closet. He's gathering them up, putting them into a box, and he looks out of the window and into the garden. Rafna's father and his stepmother are having a conversation, and he's alone in his room. Rafna puts the box of toys in the closet, and kind of like, oh, okay, here's another box. Starts rummaging through that, trying to find more toys. All of a sudden, two large hands are on his back, and they shove. And this shove sends Rafna tumbling into the closet, and the door slams shut behind him. He's alone. He's in the dark. He's having trouble understanding what has just happened. And all of a sudden, that horrible and overwhelming sense of dread that you hear so much about in these tales, it kicks in. And something in his mind is saying, don't turn around. Don't turn around. And Rafna begins to cry. And he begins to scream. And his father hears the screams from outside. And like any good father, he charges into the house, bolts through the door. And he grabs the closet doors and he goes to yank them open. And nothing happens. They are stuck. He pulls a couple more times. They are not opening. And he begins to beat on the doors. He's trying to shatter them. They are shattering. But they are not opening. And then the doors just open. No fanfare, nothing. They just creak open. But after this incident, the house is darker, colder. There's a looming sense of dread, a feeling of being watched. And none of the family like being in the house alone anymore. Rafna's father is a strong Christian. He doesn't want to talk about this. And he spends all of his time in the wood shop, outside. He's hoping that denying the situation might solve it. The stepmother, though, she takes a different approach. She goes into the kitchen and begins reading about cleansing the home and burning sage. And after that, things go neutral. Months pass. Rafna leaves for a visit with their mother. And they return to the house after a few weeks. They no longer feel the excitement of the house. There's no feeling of pride. There's just dread. And those scarlet stairs. Those scarlet stairs seem to be at the center of it. One night, Rafna's looking down the dark hallway by their room. Things just feel worse. The father's not talking about it at all. Won't even allow discussion of it until one night. One night, Rafna's father wakes up to get some water. And on the way to get that glass of water, he just decides to check in on Rafna. He opens the door and he sees Rafna standing on his bed with his eyes rolled in the back of his head, nothing but the white showing. Something is being said audibly by Rafna, but it's not making any sense. The arms are jutting out in a stiff manner. his father is now terrified. He grabs Rafna off the bed, begins praying and commanding whatever it is to leave. A little while later, they move in with their grandparents for a little while. 20 years have passed. It's still kind of talked about in Rafna's family in kind of like hushed tones. And the only thing that Rafna's father will say about any of it is that he thinks that Rafna was making the sign of the cross with his body whenever he was standing on the bed. But he always kind of described it to Rafna as making more of an arrow with her body. It's terrifying. This is one of the things that always worries me. I've moved a lot in my life, and I'm hoping to have at least one more move in my life. The next place I move to is the place that I want to die at. But no seller is going to tell you, oh, by the way, people get demonically possessed in this building. No house owner is going to tell you, yeah, we have a bit of a trouble with opossums, raccoons, Sasquatch, mosquitoes. They're not going to say that stuff. This stuff is always a surprise. Nobody, with the possible exception of Brandon Fugel, who bought the Skinwalker Ranch, nobody buys a property and is made aware of something like this that is attached to it. Once again, it's that part of society that these are things that, quote unquote, don't happen, so don't worry about it. But they do happen. They absolutely happen. You talk to pretty much anyone, even staunch skeptics, and they'll say, oh, I don't believe in ghosts. And then the next thing they say is, but there was always this one time. But if there's always a one time, doesn't that mean that it does exist? While F was growing up, he and his family would visit the same lake, and that is Devil's Lake State Park in Wisconsin. They would go every year, stay for a week every summer. And as they get older and braver and they're feeling invincible, they go to this large rock and they end up jumping off this rock into the lake. Now this rock is about 15 feet tall at the highest point, but the water is really, really deep. And as they're getting older and braver and stronger, they would jump in, try to touch the bottom, but they could never find the bottom. When F and his brother were in their teens, they took kayaks out to the rock just to jump on their own. And several times they jumped off, and whenever they got too cold, they would take a break on top of the rock to warm up in the sun. And as they're sitting there, they notice this white shape in the water, and it's floating towards the surface. And as it gets towards the surface, they realize this is the letter H, just floating near the surface of the water. And eventually it sinks back into the water and they lose sight of it. They didn't even look away. They didn't say anything. And they notice another shape floating up towards them. E. And then it sinks below too. And it's followed again. L. And again. P. Now, F and his brother, they don't know what the letters were made of. It kind of reminded them like white floating paint, maybe a foam. But they did not jump in after that. They stood up and left without saying a word and never returned. Like everyone else in their stories, they never mention it to anyone. And even as time goes on, they kind of forget that it even happened. A few years ago, F was working as a camp counselor, and they decide they're going to tell this story as a ghost story. They'd forgotten about it. It's kind of fluid in their memory. So that night, they text their brother and go, "Hey, do you remember the time when we went jumping off the rock on Devil Lake alone? And we saw something in the water." Soon his brother replies back, "Yes." F texts him back, "What was it?" And the reply was, "Letters. They spelled help." Thank you for joining us once again here on Strange Pathways. If you are having mental health trouble dealing with a paranormal incident, please reach out to the Opus Network, www.opusnetwork.org, OPUS network.org. Our Twitter, Pathways Strange. Instagram, Strange Pathways Podcast. Head over to our Facebook. We'll have a few images up for those of you who are not over on YouTube. But if you are on YouTube, I very kindly ask you, click like, comment, subscribe. It really, truly helps the algorithm notice us and gets us out to more people. I also want to thank Spaghetti Drive-By for the new music, the outro to the show. I absolutely love it. Thank you so much. And thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves and each other.
Scott Mort guide with a ghostly hand, strange pathways through haunted land. Specters calling from forgotten past, hemlock whispers secrets that will last. Footsteps fading into the dark, symbols glowing with a mystic spark. Specters calling from forgotten past, hemlock whispers secrets that will last. Footsteps fading into the dark, symbols glowing with a mystic spark. Phantom whispers echo in our ears, tales of sorrow riddled with old fears. But what leads us through the spectral night? Strange pathways making ghostic spark. Chill of wind through the creaky door, ancient curses we can't ignore. Mirrors crack with unseen force, history veers off its twisted course. Glimpses of shadows brushing against the walls, creepy laughter in the empty halls. Scott Mort brings the tales to life, strange pathways, cuts like a knife. Draped on deserted streets, listeners rise where the old heart beats. Voices calling from another realm, Scott Mort steers a spectral helm.